The mountain is covered in cloud, and beneath that cloud stands a claim that reaches far beyond the book of Genesis. The book of Jubilees does not present itself as a later opinion, or as a marginal legend gathered in the quiet corners of tradition. It speaks with much greater boldness than that. It says that while Moses remained on Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights, an angel of the presence delivered to him a fuller account of the world, a written order of history already preserved in heaven. In that opening claim, the reader is placed inside a sacred archive. Time has already been measured. Events have already been recorded. The lives of the patriarchs, the rise of evil, the flood, the covenant, even the proper rhythm of worship, all stand within a pattern that is older than Israel and older than Moses himself. That is one reason Jubilees has held such power over later readers. It takes stories that are already familiar and places them under a sharper light. Genesis gives the broad line of creation and the first generations of humanity. Jubilees slows the pace and fills in the spaces. It dates events with precision. It names periods and cycles. It insists that behind the visible history of families, migrations, altars, and famine, there is an unseen order, and that this order is not abstract. It is moral, liturgical, and cosmic at once. To keep time rightly is to live rightly. To corrupt sacred time is not a small error. It is a breach in the structure of creation. Modern scholarship does not treat the book as a document written by Moses on Sinai. Most scholars place its composition in the Second Temple period, probably in the 2nd century before Christ, and many believe it was first written in Hebrew. That difference matters. The text presents itself as ancient revelation, but history places it within a living Jewish world where scripture was being copied, interpreted, and expanded with great intensity. This does not make the book unimportant, it makes it more revealing. Jubilees shows how some Jewish communities in that era understood the earliest biblical stories and how deeply they believed those stories still govern the present. It is not simply a retelling of Genesis. It is a map of the world as one stream of ancient Judaism believed the world truly was. In that world, the line between heaven and earth is thinner than many later readers expect. Angels are not distant ornaments. They witness, govern, record, and deliver. Evil is not reduced to private temptation. It moves through spirits, rebellion, and corruption that spread across generations. The covenant is not only a promise to Abraham, it is the visible form of a much older design. Even the calendar becomes a battlefield. This is why the Book of Jubilees can feel both familiar and strange. Its characters are Adam, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses. Its scenes come from the opening books of the Bible, yet its atmosphere is different. The air is filled with heavenly tablets, angelic ranks, predetermined times, and the lingering consequences of ancient disobedience. The book was known in antiquity. Later Christian writers were aware of it in some measure, and fragments of it survived in Greek and Latin tradition. But its complete preservation came above all through Ethiopic transmission, and for long centuries that was the main doorway through which readers could approach it. Then the discoveries near the Dead Sea changed the picture. Fragments of Jubilees turned up among the scrolls from Qumran, showing that this was not a late medieval curiosity and not an isolated fantasy from the margins. It had once circulated in Hebrew among Jewish communities of the Second Temple period. It had readers, authority, and influence. That discovery also changed the way historians understood the period itself. The world around the Hebrew Bible had often been pictured too neatly, as though the line between scripture and non-scripture had always been fixed, or as though Judaism, in the centuries before the New Testament, spoke with one settled voice. The Dead Sea Scrolls revealed something more complex. Some writings were clearly treasured, copied, and treated with deep seriousness, even if they did not later enter the Hebrew Bible. Jubilees belongs to that complicated landscape. It was not a secret text in the modern sense. It was a serious text for serious communities. What then? was it trying to do? At one level, it retells biblical history from creation to the early chapters of Exodus. At another, it rearranges the listener's sense of reality. The familiar stories do not stand alone as moments of inspiration or caution. They become evidence in a case. They prove that God established a fixed pattern from the beginning, that Israel's law is woven into the fabric of the world, that the patriarchs already lived in harmony with truths, later given publicly through Moses, and that many of humanity's sufferings came not only from weak human choices, but from a deeper rupture between heaven's order and earth's rebellion. That is why a documentary approach matters here. Jubilees should not be read only as a curiosity about angels and hidden calendars. It belongs to a tense historical world. Judea in the Second Temple era lived beneath foreign empires, contested priesthoods, disputes over worship, and fierce arguments over what faithfulness looked like. In such a world, time itself could become political. Festivals could divide communities. Genealogies could define belonging. Purity could mark the boundary between obedience and compromise. A book like Jubilees was not written to entertain. It was written to persuade, to guard, to interpret, and perhaps to warn. So the journey into this text begins not with a lost gospel or a forbidden code, but with a question much older and much steadier. Is history governed by a sacred order that human beings can either honor or violate? Jubilees answers without hesitation. Yes, and once it gives that answer, everything changes shape around it. Creation is no longer only the beginning of life. It is the founding of a calendar. Covenant is no longer only promise. It is the restoration of proper alignment. Evil is no longer only disobedience. It is contamination of the world's appointed structure. And Moses, standing on the mountain, becomes not merely the receiver of law, but the witness to a vision in which the whole history of the world has already been measured in heaven. Chapter 2 before Jubilees speaks about the fall of angels or the rise of giants. It speaks about days, weeks, years, and appointed times. This is not a minor feature of the book. It is its spine. The title itself points toward ordered periods of 49 years, cycles of sevens within sevens. The pattern is drawn from biblical language about Sabbath years and Jubilee, but Jubilees extends that logic far beyond the land laws of Leviticus. It uses those cycles as a framework for the story of the world. History is not moving through empty time. It is unfolding through sacred measure. In the book's vision, time was not invented by human rulers, priests, or courts. It was established by God from the beginning. The heavenly lights were not simply lamps in the sky. They were markers of seasons and feasts. Jubilees puts extraordinary stress on a 364-day year, a complete solar order divided into equal quarters. Because 364 can be divided evenly into 52 weeks, the same dates return on the same days of the week year after year. Festivals do not drift. Sacred memory does not slide through the calendar. Worship is stabilized. Obedience becomes alignment with a pattern believed to be embedded in creation itself. To many modern readers, this may seem technical, even cold. But in the ancient world, calendars were not neutral devices. They ordered communal life. They governed planting, pilgrimage, sacrifice, taxation, and authority. A calendar could tell a people when to gather, when to rest, when to mark deliverance, and who possessed the power to declare those times. In the Second Temple period, calendar disputes were not trivial arguments among scholars. They touched the life of the temple and the meaning of covenant faithfulness. Jubilees treats this with full seriousness. To use the wrong calendar is not merely to count differently. It is to profane what God has fixed. That helps explain the sharp tone of the book when it speaks against lunar reckoning. Jubilees does not say, calmly and without judgment, that there are two possible systems. It warns that those who follow the moon in the wrong way will confuse holy days and common days, festivals and ordinary time. They will drift out of harmony with heaven's testimony. The concern is not only arithmetic, it is moral and cosmic. Sacred order on earth depends on human beings accepting the order already established above them. This is one of the places where the book reveals the spiritual imagination of its age. For Jubilees, law, worship, and creation form one continuous fabric. Sabbath is not a rule added later for social relief. It belongs to the world's design. Festivals are not national customs that developed over time. They mirror heavenly realities. The year itself becomes a kind of sanctuary, with appointed points of memory and obedience laid into it from the beginning. When time is treated correctly, the human community lives in agreement with heaven. When it is treated badly, disorder begins to spread. This way of thinking also reshapes the biblical past. The patriarchs in Jubilees often seem to know more, observe more, and preserve more sacred practice than the plain text of Genesis might suggest at first glance. Noah celebrates festival patterns. Abraham is linked closely with covenant practices. Jacob is drawn into a world where purity, tithe, and separation carry stronger emphasis. The effect is deliberate. Jubilees wants the listener to understand that the law revealed through Moses is not a new system dropped suddenly into history. It is the public expression of an ancient order that righteous figures had already honored in part. There is also comfort in such a vision. A people living amid foreign power and internal division could hear in Jubilees a message of steadiness. Empires rise, priests compete, languages mingle, customs change, but above the noise, time itself remains fixed in heaven. History is not slipping away from God. It is not an accident of kings and wars. It moves within appointed boundaries. For listeners pressed by uncertainty, that claim could bring a profound sense of security. Even if the visible world seems unstable, the invisible structure stands. And yet there is something severe in this as well. A world governed by sacred measure leaves little room for casual religion. One cannot simply feel reverent in general. One must keep the appointed order. The sanctity of time demands discipline. It demands memory. It demands the willingness to let heaven correct the habits of earth. In Jubilees, this is one reason corruption grows so dangerous. Sin is not confined to violence or idolatry. It can enter through the distortion of time itself. To move the festivals wrongly is to teach the body of a people to forget how heaven speaks. The deeper message is easy to miss if the calendar is treated as an odd obsession. Jubilees is not really asking whether people can calculate the year. It is asking whether creation has a moral architecture. It answers that it does. The year has joints and hinges. History has appointed divisions. Sacred days are not chosen because they feel meaningful. They are meaningful because they belong to a prior order established by God. That conviction gives the whole book its pressure. The stories of Genesis become proof that the world is structured, and that to live faithfully is in part to count faithfully. In this way, time becomes one of the main characters of the book. It is almost personified, not as a god, but as a witness. It bears testimony against confusion. It receives obedience or violation. It carries forward the memory of what God has done. It joins generations together. And because Jubilees is so concerned with number and order, it leaves the listener with a particular kind of awe. Not the awe of chaos, but the awe of precision. Not the fear that the world is random, but the fear that human beings may drift from a harmony they were meant to inhabit. Chapter 3. Once Jubilees has established that time is sacred, it becomes easier to see why angels matter so much in its telling. The world of this book is not a silent machine set in motion and then left to run. It is administered. Heaven watches, heaven records, heaven speaks. Jubilees describes angels as present from the earliest moments of creation, and among them it highlights certain ranks with special roles. The angels of the presence stand close to the divine will. The angels of holiness are linked with sacred order. Their world is not decorative. It is governmental. This angelic order gives the book much of its atmosphere. When Moses receives revelation on Sinai, It is not presented as an isolated miracle falling out of an otherwise quiet sky. It belongs to a larger system of communication. The angel of the present serves as mediator, interpreter, and witness. The law below reflects a reality above. This is a crucial point. In Jubilees, earth is not the primary archive of truth. Heaven is. What Moses receives is already known there. Human history is not being improvised in the moment. It is read from the heavenly tablets. The heavenly tablets are one of the book's most important images. They suggest that events, commandments, judgments, and times exist in written form before human beings encounter them in history. The image does not erase human responsibility, but it does place human life inside a world already ordered and already remembered. Nothing important is merely local. A covenant oath, a festival date, a transgression, or a family line belongs to a larger record. The listener is meant to feel the weight of that. Actions do not vanish. They enter a reality that has witnesses. In the Hebrew Bible, angels appear at chosen moments. They visit Abraham, wrestle with Jacob, stand in Balaam's path, destroy armies, carry messages, and guard holy space. Jubilees takes this biblical material and places it in a more densely inhabited universe. The invisible world is active, layered, and near. This reflects a wider development in Jewish thought during the Second Temple period. Many texts from that era show growing interest in angelic beings, cosmic struggle, heavenly liturgy, and revealed mysteries. Jubilees belongs to that same atmosphere, though it expresses it in its own disciplined way. The effect of this is not merely dramatic. It changes how moral life is understood. If angels keep watch over times, testimonies, and human deeds, then obedience is never a private matter. The world is thick with meaning. To honor the Sabbath or keep covenant boundaries is to act in view of heaven. To defile what is holy is to step out of harmony with a larger order in which spiritual beings have their appointed roles. The listener is drawn into a universe where religion cannot be reduced to personal feeling. It is public before heaven even when hidden on earth. This angelic structure also helps explain why Jubilees speak so confidently about continuity between creation, patriarchal history, and Mosaic law. If the same heavenly order spans all these ages, then the righteous of earlier generations can be shown living in ways that anticipate later commandments. The separation modern readers sometimes draw between primeval story, ancestral narrative, and law code is softened. In Jubilees, heaven sees one coherent pattern. The God who set the lights in the sky is the God who appoints sacred times, covenants, and boundaries among nations. Angels become the witnesses of that unity. There is, however, no sentimentality in this. The angels of Jubilees are not companions for comfort in the modern sense. They are signs of seriousness. They show that the world is observed. They show that holiness is structured. They show that revelation carries authority, because it comes from above the shifting calculations of human society. Even when the book turns later to angelic rebellion among the Watchers, the force of that story depends on the prior assumption that angels belong to an ordered hierarchy. Their fall is terrible because it is not the failure of wandering spirits in a vague myth. It is the violation of appointed place and purpose. One can also feel in this theology the memory of temple culture. Ancient Israelite worship was never only about inward piety. Involved place, timing, sacrifice, priesthood, purity, and the conviction that earthly worship echoed a heavenly reality. By the Second Temple period, especially among circles deeply concerned with holiness, such convictions could be extended into rich speculation and disciplined reflection. Jubilees does not dwell on elaborate heavenly journeys the way some apocalyptic texts do, but it shares their sense that earthly life cannot be understood without reference to the world above. This helps modern listeners avoid one common mistake. The book is not trying merely to satisfy curiosity about angels. It is trying to frame the entire human story within divine administration. Heaven is not background scenery. It is the true court of record. The visible world is where obedience and rebellion take shape, but their meaning is measured in a larger arena. That is why Jubilees can move so naturally from creation to calendar, from law to angels, from family history to cosmic conflict. In its thought, these are not separate subjects. They are strands of one design, and that design has memory. The heavenly tablets suggest that God's world is not fragile in the way human societies are fragile. Empires forget, archives burn, generations reinterpret, but heaven remembers. That conviction gives the book both its calm and its urgency. Calm, because history is not lost. Urgency, because every human generation is accountable to what heaven has already established. In a text so shaped by order, the angels are more than messengers. They are signs that the world is held together by an unseen fidelity, and that human beings live every day beneath its gaze. Chapter 4 Jubilees is often called Little Genesis, but that name can mislead if it suggests something small or secondary. The book certainly retells Genesis and part of Exodus, yet it does not behave like a brief summary. It revisits the familiar ground with purpose. It moves through the old stories as a careful editor, strengthening some lines, clarifying others, and closing what it sees as dangerous gaps. The result is not a different Bible, but a more controlled one. Is reduced. Chronology is tightened. The ancestors of Israel begin to look more explicitly like guardians of covenant practice. This is especially clear in the way the book treats law before Sinai. In the plain reading of the Pentateuch, many commandments are publicly revealed through Moses in the wilderness. Jubilees, by contrast, often places key forms of holiness much earlier. The Sabbath belongs to creation. Circumcision belongs deeply to Abraham. Festival patterns, purity concerns, and distinctions among peoples appear in sharper relief long before Sinai's public thunder. The message is not that Moses invented Israel's order, but that he received and confirmed what had already stood in heaven and had already been known in earlier generations. There is a theological motive here, but also a historical one. A community under pressure will often read its past in a way that strengthens its present boundaries. If intermarriage, assimilation, or contested ritual practice threatened Jewish identity in the Second Temple period, then a retelling of the patriarchal age could become a way of answering those pressures. Jubilees does just that. It portrays Israel's ancestors not as wandering figures still discovering faith in stages, but as models of separation, fidelity, and sacred memory. The family stories of Genesis are drawn toward a more disciplined ideal. Abraham receives particular emphasis. In Genesis, he is already the father of the covenant, the one who leaves his land, trusts the promise, and receives circumcision. Jubilees deepens this profile. Abraham becomes a more explicit enemy of idolatry and a clearer defender of divine truth in a world of nations led astray. The book accentuates his role as a keeper of heavenly order. He is not only chosen, he is exemplary. In some passages, the tone suggests that true faithfulness is not improvisation under uncertain conditions, but recovery of what heaven already intended from the beginning. The same shaping occurs with Jacob and his sons. Tribal history in Genesis contains deception, rivalry, grief, violence, reconciliation, and moral complexity. Jubilees does not erase those tensions, but it often guides them toward a more programmatic end. Family lines matter intensely. Marriage choices matter intensely. The distinction between Israel and the nations grows firmer. This reflects one of the book's deepest concerns. Holiness is not merely inward devotion. It is embodied in generations, inheritance, practice, and the guarded transmission of identity through time. Noah also stands differently in Jubilees than he does in a simple retelling. In Genesis, Noah survives the flood, plants a vineyard, becomes vulnerable, and lives in the shadow of both blessing and curse. Jubilees places stronger attention on Noah as a bearer of sacred knowledge after catastrophe. The flood does not wipe away the structure of the world. It resets human history within that structure. Noah's role becomes not only survival, but preservation. He marks times, he transmits instruction, he belongs to the chain through which divine order remains known after judgment has cleansed the earth. This tendency to clarify and extend is one reason the book feels so controlled. It dislikes loose ends. If Genesis leaves a silence, Jubilees often fills it. If a command seems to emerge late, Jubilees may anchor it earlier. If a figure's motives could be read in different ways, Jubilees often narrows the field. There is gain and loss in this. The gain is coherence. The world feels joined together by a strong interpretive vision. The loss is some of the raw openness that makes Genesis so enduringly human. Jubilees is less willing to leave characters in twilight. Yet that difference is precisely what makes the book historically valuable. It shows one way ancient readers handled scripture. They did not always approach the older texts as neutral archives. They read with urgency. They interpreted with communal needs in view. They ask not only what happened, but how the story should be told, so that covenant faithfulness would become unmistakable. Jubilees is therefore a witness to scriptural imagination in the Second Temple age. It lets us hear how inherited traditions could be preserved by being reshaped. The book's treatment of Eden also reveals this concern. Paradise is not only a lost garden, it becomes a moral and sacred point of reference, linked with holiness, judgment, and memory. Enoch, in some renderings of the tradition, is taken to a place associated with Eden to bear witness and record. The geography of sacred beginnings remains alive in the book's imagination. Creation is not a distant preface. It continues to interpret the present. The earliest places, commands, and family lines still define the meaning of later history. For a long-form documentary reading, this matters because it changes the emotional weight of the stories. Jubilees is not retelling the past for atmosphere. It is reconstructing ancestral memory so that listeners will understand themselves. The fathers are made more exemplary because the community needs exemplars. Sacred time is made more exact because confusion is dangerous. Distinctions between peoples are made more explicit because identity feels threatened. The book does not hide these aims. It writes with the confidence of a tradition that believes faithful survival depends on reading the past correctly. And so the familiar stories begin to sound different. They are less open-ended, more judicial, less tentative, more liturgical, less like a family saga unfolding in the rough dust of history, and more like a sacred record being aligned with heavenly order. That difference can feel severe, but it also reveals the hope beneath the severity. Jubilees believes the biblical past is not random memory. It is instruction preserved for a people who must learn again how to live in rhythm with God's world. Chapter 5 in Genesis, the story of the sons of God and the daughters of men, appears briefly just before the flood. The text is famous for its mystery. It does not explain everything readers might want to know. It leaves behind a strange and troubling impression. Boundaries were crossed, violence spread, and the earth moved toward judgment. Later Jewish tradition did not leave that moment untouched. Among the texts that expanded it, the Book of Jubilees gave the story a particular shape, one that fits its larger concern with order and corruption. In Jubilees, the Watchers are not introduced as random monsters from the dark edges of myth. They begin as heavenly beings assigned to a task. They are sent in relation to humankind, but they do not remain faithful to their purpose. Instead, they become entangled with human desire and earthly life. The crossing of boundaries is central. Heaven's servants step outside their proper station. Their union with women produces monstrous offspring. The giants and violence spreads across the earth. The world is not simply morally weak. It has become structurally contaminated. This is a striking development of the Genesis account, and it reflects a broader current in ancient Jewish literature, especially alongside works such as 1 Enoch. Yet Jubilees handles the material in its own way. The point is not merely to make the pre-flood world more dramatic. It is to explain why corruption became so deep and why judgment had to be so sweeping. Human sin remains real, but human history is shown as vulnerable to spiritual intrusion. The flood, then, is not only a response to ordinary wickedness, it is a response to a world disordered at multiple levels. The giants embody this disorder. They are not just large enemies in a heroic tale. They are a sign that the proper divisions of creation have been violated. When categories collapse, violence follows. The earth groans under beings who do not belong within the intended order. This is ancient language, ancient imagination, and ancient theology. It does not operate by modern categories of biology or myth criticism. It speaks through sacred boundaries. Heaven and earth were not meant to mingle this way. When they do, the result is devastation. Jubilees also ties forbidden knowledge to corruption. In some streams of the tradition, the Watchers teach arts and skills that become instruments of pride, warfare, or occult practice. Astronomy, metalwork, enchantment, and forms of hidden instruction are drawn into a story about the misuse of knowledge. One must be careful here. Ancient texts do not reject knowledge in the abstract. Jubilees itself values precision, record, and revealed order. The problem lies in knowledge detached from obedience, knowledge seized or passed on in rebellion, knowledge that gives power without holiness. In that sense, the concern is moral, not anti-intellectual. For a people living in a world of imperial influence and cultural exchange, this theme would have carried weight. Foreign wisdom could impress. New customs could appear sophisticated. Techniques of rule, warfare, and divination could travel across borders. Jubilees answers such realities by insisting that not every form of knowledge is innocent. Some things enter human life as corruption, not gift. The book is not offering a philosophy seminar. It is guarding a covenant community. It asks whether power, insight, and technique are ordered toward God or toward disorder. The flood story, seen through this lens, becomes even more solemn. Waters do not come merely to punish a few violent men. They come to wash a polluted world. The judgment is cosmic in scale, because the contamination is cosmic in scope. Yet even here, Jubilees is not fascinated only with destruction. It wants the listener to see judgment as restoration of boundaries. Creation is being defended against a rebellion that has moved through flesh, desire, and spirit. The flood is terrible, but it is not chaotic. It is a severe act within the same ordered world the book has been describing from the beginning. There is also a sadness in the way the story unfolds. The Watchers were associated with oversight, attention, and perhaps instruction. That makes their fall more grievous. They do not merely attack from outside, they betray vocation. The same is true, in a different register, of human beings who receive gifts and use them toward violence. Jubilees understands evil not only as the presence of bad impulses, but as the distortion of good structures. Guardians become corruptors. Knowledge becomes a weapon. Fruitfulness becomes monstrous excess. Time itself can be desecrated. Disorder grows by turning proper things away from their proper end. This theme helps explain why the book spends so much effort on boundaries elsewhere. Marriage boundaries, national boundaries, ritual boundaries, calendrical boundaries, angelic boundaries. To a modern ear, that may sound restrictive. To Jubilees, it is survival. Once the listener has seen what happens when the line between heaven and earth is transgressed in the days before the flood, the whole moral universe of the book becomes easier to understand. Boundaries are not there to narrow life into fear. They are there to preserve creation from collapse. And still, the text never fully dissolves the mystery. Much remains strange. How exactly should such passages be read? As literal events, symbolic theology, or a mixture of ancient memory and interpretive vision? Different communities have answered differently. Jubilees itself writes with confidence, but the modern historian must speak more carefully. What can be said with clarity is that the book uses the Watchers to tell a story about corruption spreading beyond the ordinary limits of human failure. It enlarges the moral horizon of Genesis. The flood comes not because history is messy, but because creation itself has been wounded. That is why the story has endured. It speaks to a recurring human fear that evil is larger than any one decision and older than any one empire. It gives that fear a shape, yet it also gives history a structure. Corruption is real, but it is not ultimate. Judgment comes. Boundaries are restored. The world belongs to God before it belongs to the rebels within it. In Jubilees, the terror of the Watchers is never the final word. Their fall only sharpens the seriousness of the order they have violated. Chapter 6. After the flood, one might expect peace, or at least a clean beginning. The giants are gone. The waters have receded. Noah and his family stand on new ground, under a covenant sign in the sky. But Jubilees does not permit such simplicity. The flood may have broken the violence of the old world, yet spiritual corruption has not been removed entirely. It changes form. This is where one of the book's most distinctive figures enters with force: Mastema. Mastema is difficult to translate into modern categories because the book does not treat him as a simple equal opposite to God. He is an adversarial figure associated with accusation, hostility, deception, and testing. Yet he operates within limits. He asks. He receives permission. He is feared, but he is not sovereign. In this sense, Jubilees preserves an older biblical tension rather than resolving it into later, cleaner schemes of cosmic dualism. Evil is active and personal, but it is not outside divine rule. Even the dark work of testing occurs under constraint. One of the most memorable moments in the book comes after the flood, when the problem of evil spirits remains. According to Jubilees, the offspring or effects of the old corruption continue to trouble humanity. Mastema asks that a portion of these spirits remain free rather than being wholly restrained. The number is limited. A tenth is permitted to continue. The detail is striking, not because it satisfies curiosity, but because it reveals the book's theology of history. Human life after judgment is not free from spiritual danger. Testing remains part of the world. This is a severe idea, and it can be misunderstood if handled carelessly. Jubilees is not delighting in darkness. It is trying to explain why even after dramatic acts of divine deliverance, evil still persists. Why does violence return after the flood? Why do human beings remain vulnerable? Why does covenant history continue to move through affliction and trial? The book's answer is not that God failed to cleanse the world. It is that the world, for a time, remains a place of proving. Accusation and temptation are allowed a limited field in which to operate. This portrayal makes Mastema more than a villain. He becomes part of the book's meditation on judgment and testing. In some passages, he appears in relation to Abraham's trial. The Akedah, the binding of Isaac, already stands in Genesis as one of the most difficult scenes in all Scripture. Jubilees places it within a wider spiritual drama. The test is not emptied of mystery, but it is set within the world of accusation and proving. In that world, faithfulness is refined under pressure, while heaven watches. The emotional cost does not lessen. If anything, it deepens. The book also associates Mastema with resistance to God's deliverers and purposes. Traditions differ in the details readers highlight, but the broad pattern is clear. Opposition in history is not merely human stubbornness. Behind the visible struggle stands an accuser who seeks ruin, confusion, and fear. Yet once again, the book resists making evil ultimate. Mastema is dangerous precisely because he is permitted to test, not because he rules history. His role is parasitic. He presses, accuses, and exploits. He does not create covenant. He does not write the heavenly tablets. He does not determine the final shape of time. That subtlety matters. Later readers often prefer clearer lines. They want a neat answer to the problem of evil, either a fully independent enemy or a purely impersonal force. Jubilees offers neither. It reflects an older and more unsettling conviction that the world includes both divine sovereignty and real, painful testing. The righteous suffer not because history is abandoned, but because history is still contested. The presence of spiritual hostility does not negate sacred order. It unfolds within it. That is not an easy doctrine. It is not meant to be easy. It is meant to explain why covenant life can be secure and dangerous at the same time. There is a pastoral element in this, though the book would not use that word. A community facing hardship may ask whether its afflictions mean that God has lost control. Jubilees answers no. Trials do not prove divine weakness. They reveal the seriousness of fidelity. If a portion of evil remains active, it remains active under measure. The world is not surrendered, it is tested. That may not satisfy modern longing for a softer account, but it does preserve a profound sense of meaning. Suffering is not random noise. It enters a drama already bounded by heaven. At the same time, the presence of Mastema heightens human responsibility. One cannot blame spirits for everything. Jubilees never treats human beings as puppets. It speaks of testing, temptation, and accusation, but it also insists on obedience, covenant memory, and moral decision. The point is not to excuse sin, but to name the environment in which sin unfolds. Humanity lives in a world where invisible hostility is real, where old corruption leaves traces, and where covenant loyalty must be renewed against pressure from within and without. In this sense, Mastema belongs naturally beside the calendar and the angels. He is part of the same worldview. Heaven has order, history has measure. Spiritual beings have roles. Some serve holiness, some oppose it, but all are situated within a reality governed by God. Once that is grasped, Jubilees can be read with greater clarity. Its interest in demons and accusers is not sensationalism. It is an attempt to account for the stubborn presence of evil in a world still believed to be governed by sacred law. The darkness remains, but only on a leash. Chapter 7. If the Book of Jubilees had emerged in a quiet age, its strictness might seem easier to dismiss as an eccentric preference. But it did not arise in a quiet age. It belongs to the Second Temple period, when Judea lived under the shadow of great empires and the internal life of the Jewish people was marked by real tension. Persian rule had given way to Hellenistic kingdoms. Greek language and culture spread widely across the Eastern Mediterranean. Cities' education, law, and public life were reshaped by new patterns of power. Not every Jewish response to that world was the same. Some adapted, some resisted. Some sought ways to preserve ancestral faith while navigating changing realities. Others feared that accommodation would become surrender. In such an atmosphere, a book like Jubilees makes historical sense. Its insistence on sacred time, ancestral purity, covenant boundaries, and heavenly order sounds very much like the voice of a community under pressure. A community convinced that faithfulness required more than general piety. It required distinction. It required discipline. It required saying that the old ways were not merely old. They were written into creation. This does not mean every line of the book can be reduced to politics. Jubilees is deeply theological, and its concerns are genuinely religious. But theology often sharpens under pressure, and texts take shape in response to lived conflict. The book's interest in the correct calendar, for example, likely reflects more than abstract mathematics. Competing calendars could place communities at different festivals on different days. That is not a minor disagreement. It divides worship, pilgrimage, and authority. To declare one calendar heavenly and another corrupt is to draw a line through the religious life of the nation. The same is true of family boundaries. Jubilees is deeply concerned about intermarriage and the mixing of peoples in ways it considers dangerous to covenant identity. Modern readers may find some of this stern, even painful, and historically it should be recognized as part of the book's strong boundary-making impulse. Yet that very impulse reveals something essential about the age. Identity felt fragile, a people shaped by law, land, memory, and worship had to ask what could be yielded and what could not. Jubilees answers in favor of guarded continuity. Its strong priestly and liturgical concerns also point in this direction. The temple stood at the center of Jewish life. Yet the temple was also a place where politics, legitimacy, purity, and interpretation met. Priestly lines mattered. Festival observance mattered. Questions about correct worship were never purely private. Jubilees reflects a world in which holiness is structured and inherited, and in which disorder in worship is dangerous because it threatens the covenant body. It is a text of order written for a time when order felt contested. Scholars continue to debate exactly which community produced the book. It is often linked in broad spirit, with circles interested in priestly tradition, calendrical purity, and strict covenant identity. Later readers frequently connect it with the kind of world represented at Qumran, and the presence of multiple Jubilees manuscripts among the Dead Sea Scrolls shows that the work was highly valued in at least some such environments. But caution is still needed. The author of Jubilees cannot be named with certainty, and the path from composition to community use is not fully clear. What remains clear is the book's alignment with a serious, disciplined, and boundary-conscious form of Jewish life. That seriousness helps explain why the text reaches back so strongly into the age of the patriarchs. If one wishes to defend present practice, one powerful strategy is to show that it belongs to the fathers. If one wishes to argue that sacred time must be fixed and festivals rightly kept, then one can portray those patterns as ancient rather than recent. If one wishes to resist foreign influence, one can cast Abraham as a man who already turned from the nation's errors. The past becomes a charter for the present. In Jubilees, history is not passive memory, it is active instruction. This is also why the book's tone can feel both confident and anxious. Confident because it speaks with heavenly authority, anxious because it speaks with such authority precisely where pressures are strong. It does not sound like a community at ease. It sounds like a community making a case for survival. The rhetoric of sacred order answers a world that appears disorderly. The precision of the calendar answers contested practice. The sharpening of patriarchal obedience answers fears of compromise. Even the role of angels and spirits answers the sense that visible events are not the whole story. For long-form narration, this historical setting is essential. Without it, Jubilees can sound like a strange collection of additions to Genesis. With it, the book becomes intelligible as an act of interpretation, born in a particular age. It is Jewish scripture reading under pressure. It is theology shaped by empire. It is ancestral memory turned into moral defense. And because it speaks through revered biblical figures rather than modern argument, it gives that defense an authority no contemporary pamphlet could have achieved. This is not unusual in the ancient world. Many texts claimed ancient voices to speak into present needs. Modern readers often hear that as deception, but the ancient literary practice was more complicated. To write in the name of Moses was to place one's teaching under the weight of foundational revelation. It was to say, in effect, that what is being taught now is not new. It belongs to the oldest truth of Israel's story. Whether one accepts that claim religiously is one question. Historically, the claim itself reveals how authority was imagined. So when Jubilees speaks from Sinai, it is doing more than framing a narrative. It is locating all its concerns where Israel's covenant identity was most decisively given. The mountain becomes the vantage point from which time, law, ancestry, and cosmic struggle can be understood as one. For a people living centuries later, beneath foreign rule, that is a powerful move. It says that the answer to present confusion is not innovation, but remembrance. Not accommodation, but alignment. Not loosened boundaries, but renewed attention to the order God fixed from the beginning. Chapter 8 centuries passed. Empires shifted, and the Book of Jubilees did not disappear. That fact alone is worth attention. Many ancient writings were copied for a time and then vanished entirely. Jubilees survived in more than one stream of transmission, and its recovery in modern scholarship tells a story almost as compelling as the world it describes. For a long period, readers knew the book chiefly through Ethiopic tradition. In the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, it held a place of honor and canonical status, preserved not as a forgotten curiosity, but as sacred literature still read within living worship. Outside that tradition, however, knowledge of the work was fragmentary. Greek references and scattered remains suggested an older history, but much was uncertain. Then came the discoveries in the Judean desert. The Dead Sea Scrolls, found in caves near Qumran beginning in the mid-20th century, transformed the study of ancient Judaism. Among biblical manuscripts, sectarian texts, hymns, legal writings, and apocalyptic works were fragments of jubilees in Hebrew. That discovery mattered enormously. It showed that the book belonged deeply to the textual world of the Second Temple period. The importance of Qumran is not simply that it yielded ancient manuscripts. It revealed a library, or rather a textual culture, in which the boundaries between later categories of scripture, commentary, legal tradition, and visionary literature were not yet fixed in the way many assume. Some texts that later fell outside most canons were copied repeatedly and treasured seriously. Jubilees appears to have been one of them. Its presence among the scrolls suggests not casual interest, but sustained value. Communities connected with that world found in the book something worth preserving. This does not mean every group in ancient Judaism treated Jubilees the same way. Far from it. The Second Temple world was diverse, and the idea of a fully closed canon was still developing. Some writings eventually became central to the Jewish and Christian biblical collections. Others did not. Jubilees stands as a reminder that scriptural authority in this period was a more fluid and contested matter than later assumptions sometimes allow. A text could be revered, copied, and used without eventually becoming part of the standard Hebrew Bible. Its survival in Ethiopic adds another dimension. While mainstream rabbinic Judaism and most branches of Christianity did not include Jubilees in their final canons, the Ethiopian tradition preserved it whole. That preservation is historically precious. It means the book was not reconstructed only from scraps and quotations. It remained a complete work in a living ecclesial context. Yet even there, modern scholarship still compares manuscripts, translation layers, and ancient fragments in order to understand what the earliest form may have been. The history of the text is therefore both stable and complex. Stable in survival, complex in transmission. The likely path runs from a Hebrew original through ancient translation into Greek, and from Greek into Ge'ez, the classical language of Ethiopia, though details remain debated in places. What matters for the larger story is that Jubilees was not born as an Ethiopic text. It arose in a Jewish setting, probably in Hebrew, and traveled across languages, communities, and centuries. Each stage of that journey tells us something about reception. The book crossed borders because it answered needs that did not end with its first audience. Its influence can also be felt indirectly. Themes central to Jubilees, such as intense interest in angelic orders, the corruption of the Watchers, fixed sacred time, and a sharpened reading of Genesis, resonated within broader currents of Jewish thought. Not every later text depends on Jubilees directly, and influence is often difficult to map with certainty. But the world it reflects was not isolated. It shared concerns with other literature of the era, including apocalyptic writings and sectarian traditions that sought to interpret Israel's story in light of cosmic conflict and covenant discipline. The book's exclusion from most mainstream canons should also be understood calmly rather than dramatically. It was not cast out because later readers feared a secret truth too powerful to handle. Canon formation was a long historical process shaped by worship, language, communal use, theology, and inherited authority. Jubilees was influential in some places and not in others. Some of its emphasis fit uneasily with emerging mainstream traditions. Its rewritten form of Genesis, its strict calendar, and its rich expansions may have made it less suitable for communities that prioritized the more widely received Torah text or different interpretive frameworks. Still, exclusion from one canon does not erase historical importance. If anything, Jubilees is one of the clearest windows into the variety of Jewish scriptural life before later boundaries harden. It shows us that biblical interpretation in antiquity could be bold, comprehensive, and deeply devotional. It shows us that communities did not always separate law, narrative, and cosmic order into different compartments. And it shows us that a text could survive at the margins of one tradition while remaining central in another. There is something fitting in that. Jubilees is itself a book about preservation. It preserves times, it preserves boundaries, it preserves ancestral order against decay. Its own manuscript history mirrors that concern in an unexpected way. Hidden in caves, carried in translation, remembered in distant liturgies, recovered by scholars one fragment at a time, it endured the same long pressures of time that it claims to measure so exactly. The book that tried to organize history had to survive history's own harsh weather. And because it survived, the modern listener is able to hear not only its theology, but its historical witness. We hear a Jewish voice from the centuries before the New Testament, a voice convinced that the world's beginning still governed the present, and that heaven had not left the calendar, the covenant, or the nations to drift. That voice did not become the only voice of Jewish tradition, but it remained a real one, and through Qumran, Ethiopia, and the patient labor of textual scholars, it still speaks. Chapter 9. There is a temptation, when reading a book like Jubilees, to ask only one question: should it have been in the Bible? That question has its place, especially for communities concerned with canon and authority. But it is not the only question, and perhaps not the first. A more illuminating question may be this: what kind of reading of Scripture does Jubilees represent? When approached that way, the book becomes less a contestant for a fixed shelf, and more a witness to how ancient readers wrestled with revelation, memory, and identity. Jubilees reads the biblical story as a unified moral order. It is uneasy with ambiguity. Where Genesis leaves motives partly open, Jubilees often narrows them. Where Genesis tells a story without explaining every implication, Jubilees often adds explanation. Where the Torah reveals commandments in stages, Jubilees often pushes their roots backward into the lives of the patriarchs, or into creation itself. This is not random embellishment. It is interpretation with a goal: to show that covenant holiness was always the true structure of the world. In doing so, the book brings out tensions already present in ancient faith. How much of the law is eternal? How much was known before Sinai? How should the stories of Genesis guide later practice? How should Israel distinguish itself from the nations? What role do angels and spirits play in history? These questions were not invented by the author of Jubilees. They belonged to the ongoing life of Scripture. The book answers them in one powerful way, and in that sense it should be read not as a detached oddity, but as part of a living exegetical culture. At the same time, there are limits to what historical study can say. We can trace manuscripts. We can compare language, themes, and textual relationships. We can place the book within Second Temple Judaism and note its possible affinities with priestly or sectarian concerns. But we cannot always determine how every community used it, or how every ancient reader ranked its authority against other texts. The past is recoverable only in part. Jubilees itself would appreciate that irony, since it insists so strongly that heaven keeps the full record even when earth does not. It is also important to distinguish between the biblical text and later interpretive expansions. Genesis contains the seed of many things Jubilees develops, but it does not say everything Jubilees says. The short passage about the sons of God becomes a larger narrative about the Watchers. The broad pattern of sacred times becomes a fixed heavenly calendar. The covenant with the patriarchs becomes a more explicit anticipation of later legal structures. None of this means Jubilees is dishonest. It means it reads scripture through a particular theological lens and writes with unusual confidence. Later traditions sometimes took different paths. Rabbinic Judaism developed rich forms of interpretation, but not around the precise calendrical system and rewritten patriarchal model Jubilees presents. Most Christian traditions also did not adopt the book into canon, though some themes familiar from the wider world of Second Temple Judaism remain significant, especially interest in angels, demons, judgment, and the unseen drama of history. The Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, however, continued to preserve Jubilees as scripture, which reminds us again that no single later outcome exhausts the book's historical life. For modern readers, this can be both freeing and demanding. Freeing because one need not force the book into a false choice between total rejection and uncritical acceptance. Demanding because responsible reading requires distinctions. One must ask what the text itself says, what historical context explains about its concerns, what later communities did with it, and what remains uncertain. A calm documentary reading does not flatten those layers. It keeps them in view. That is part of honoring the text honestly. The difference between the biblical account and later interpretation matters for another reason. It reminds us that ancient faith communities were not passive recipients of tradition. They thought with their scriptures. They argued through them. They extended them. They built communal identity around them. Jubilees is one of the clearest examples of this active scriptural life. It shows the Bible not as a dead archive, but as a generative world in which each age sought guidance, warning, and structure. That search could produce bold and sometimes controversial results. There is also a lesson here about mystery. The popularity of Jubilees in some circles has often been driven by the sense that it unlocks hidden truths buried behind the canonical text. But the book itself is more disciplined than that modern appetite suggests. Yes, it reveals angels, calendars, and cosmic conflict, but it does so in order to impose order, not to encourage endless speculation. It does not invite the listener into a maze of secret codes. It invites the listener into a stricter reading of covenant history. The mystery it offers is orderly, not chaotic. So the real significance of Jubilees may lie less in the question of hidden information and more in the question of worldview. What kind of universe does this book assume? It assumes a universe in which heaven records history, time is sacred, law is ancient, boundaries matter, spirits are real, evil is active but limited, and Israel's story belongs within a cosmic framework. That worldview shaped how the text read Genesis and Exodus. It also shaped how certain Jewish communities may have understood themselves in a dangerous age. When read this way, Jubilees does not need to be sensational in order to be profound. It is already profound because it preserves an ancient attempt to hold together scripture, history, worship, and cosmic order in one coherent vision. That vision is not the only ancient Jewish vision, but it is one of the most complete. It deserves to be heard in its own voice, with all its severity, beauty, confidence, and unresolved questions. Chapter 10. What does it feel like to live inside the world Jubilees describes? Not simply to read it as a historian, but to stand within its logic for a moment. It would feel like living in a world where every day arrives already marked, where the sky is not empty, where family lines carry sacred charge, where festivals are not reminders invented by culture, but appointments fixed by heaven, and where the past remains close because it's written into the structure of time. Such a world is both reassuring and demanding. It is reassuring because chaos is never final. Kingdoms may oppress, priests may fail, communities may fracture, and violence may return, but history itself is not abandoned. The weeks of years continue. The heavenly tablets endure. The Creator who ordered the lights in the sky has not lost hold of the human story. For a people bruised by uncertainty, that conviction could sustain patience. The calendar itself becomes a sign that God still rules. But it is demanding because such a world allows little casualness. If time is sacred, one must keep it rightly. If boundaries protect creation, one must guard them carefully. If angels witness, one cannot pretend obedience is a private mood. If spirits test, one cannot mistake temptation for harmless drift. The moral life becomes severe without necessarily becoming loud. Jubilees does not need theatrical language to create pressure. The pressure comes from order. It comes from the claim that everything has a place and that misplacing things leads to ruin. This is one reason the book's piety feels different from later forms of devotion shaped mostly by inward experience. In Jubilees, faith is not detached from body, household, calendar, inheritance, or land. It is social and patterned. It is carried in meals, marriages, ritual memory, and the disciplined marking of time. That does not mean the heart is absent. It means the heart is expected to be formed through practice. Belief lives in habits that align a people with heaven's design. There is beauty in this, though it is a stern beauty. The year becomes a liturgy. The family becomes a vessel of memory. The covenant becomes something worn, not as a mere symbol, but as a lived rhythm. Even suffering can be placed within a larger frame. Trials are real, but they are not meaningless. The righteous endure testing under the gaze of heaven. That conviction can lend dignity to hardship, though it does not soften pain. Abraham still feels the knife in the air over Isaac. Israel still knows oppression. What changes is the sense that these things occur within a world still measured by God. And there are hard edges too. Jubilees is not a gentle, modern meditation. Its concern for separation can seem severe. Its treatment of nations and mixed unions reflects a boundary-conscious world that many later readers will approach with discomfort, and rightly so. Historical honesty requires naming that. The book's vision of holiness is intensely communal and protective. It can inspire fidelity, but it can also narrow sympathy. That tension belongs to the text itself. To read it responsibly is not to hide its sharpness. Yet even that sharpness reveals something true about the age that produced it. Communities under pressure often define themselves through boundaries. They ask what can be preserved, what must be resisted, and what compromises would dissolve their memory. Jubilees answers these questions with uncommon force. It was not written for a comfortable audience. It was written for listeners who believed the line between faithfulness and corruption might run through the calendar, the household, the marriage bond, the festival table, and the interpretation of ancestral stories. This is why the book still speaks to modern readers, even those who do not share its full outlook. It addresses a human longing that never quite disappears. The longing to believe that life is not random, that history is accountable, that memory matters, and that visible events do not exhaust reality. Jubilees answers that longing with disciplined confidence. It says the world has structure. It says disorder is real, but not ultimate. It says what happens on earth is watched from heaven and judged in relation to a law older than empire. At the same time, the book warns against a false search for order. Not every system that claims precision is faithful. The order that matters here is not control for its own sake. It is obedience to the Creator's design. The danger comes when humans try to reorder the world around appetite, power, or convenience. That is what the Watchers did. That is what corrupt communities do when they profane times and confuse boundaries. The contrast is sharp. There is heaven's order, and there is the restless human urge to reshape that order for its own ends. In long-form narration, This allows the Book of Jubilees to become more than a text about ancient controversies. It becomes a meditation on how communities survive. They survive by remembering what they are for. They survive by guarding time, story, worship, and inheritance. They survive by refusing to let the visible pressures of the age define ultimate reality. Whether one agrees with every conclusion of the book or not, its seriousness about communal memory feels recognizably human. Every age fears drift. Every age wonders what must be kept. So the world of Jubilees stands before us with both distance and familiarity. Its angels, giants, and heavenly tablets belong to an ancient imagination. Its questions about order, corruption, loyalty, and time remain close. That is one reason the book continues to attract attention. It offers not merely hidden stories, but a total vision. It tells the listener that the world is more structured, more burdened, and more morally charged than it appears at first glance. In times of confusion, such a claim can feel either oppressive or profoundly consoling. Sometimes it feels like both. Chapter 11. At the end of this journey, the Book of Jubilees remains what it has always been. Not a replacement for Genesis, not a simple appendix to it, but a formidable act of biblical interpretation from the ancient world. It begins on Sinai because it wants all history seen from the height of revelation. From that height, creation is not only origin but ordinance. The patriarchs are not only ancestors but witnesses to a law already rooted in heaven. The flood is not only punishment but purification of a violated order. Israel is not only a nation in history, but a people called to align earthly life with sacred time. That is why the book cannot be reduced to its most dramatic features. The watchers matter, but they matter because they cross boundaries in a world defined by proper place. Mastema matters, but he matters because he shows how testing persists without overturning divine rule. The calendar matters, perhaps more than any modern reader first expects, because it is the daily expression of whether heaven's order will be honored on earth. Every major theme returns to the same conviction. The world is governed by a holiness that has shape. Historically, the book gives us something precious. It allows us to hear one stream of Jewish thought from the centuries before the life of Jesus and before the later formations of Rabbinic Judaism. It speaks from within the contested religious culture of the Second Temple period, where law, temple, calendar, purity, and identity were all alive with debate. Through Jubilees, the biblical past is not remembered passively. It is actively defended, interpreted, and pressed into service for a community struggling to remain itself under pressure. Its preservation among the Dead Sea Scrolls confirms that this was not an isolated voice. Its survival in the Ethiopian tradition confirms that its life did not end in antiquity. Its absence from most later canons confirms something else: that ancient communities did not all draw their boundaries in the same place. In that sense, the history of Jubilees is itself a lesson in humility. The world out of which the Bible emerged was richer and more varied than simplified accounts often admit. Some texts became central everywhere, others remained central somewhere. Jubilees belongs to the second kind, but it still illuminates the first. The book also teaches modern readers how strong the desire for order can become when a people feels threatened. In quiet times, broad principles may seem enough. In hard times, communities often ask for tighter lines, clearer times, older roots, firmer stories. Jubilees answers those needs with extraordinary confidence. It says the lines are already drawn in heaven, the times are already fixed. The roots go back to creation. The stories of the fathers were always pointing here. Such assurance can inspire courage. It can also harden the soul if held without mercy. The book's power lies partly in that tension. Still, beneath its strictness there is wonder. The world of Jubilees is not disenchanted. The sky marks holy time. Angels stand near the story. The first pages of scripture echo across all later generations. History is not sealed inside political causes alone. It is open to heaven. Even the most ordinary rhythm of days can become a sign that creation is still under judgment, memory, and care. In a modern age often flattened by speed and distraction, that older sense of a morally charged universe can feel startling. One does not need to accept every claim of the book in order to recognize its depth. It invites a slower reading of the biblical world. It reminds us that ancient listeners heard Genesis not as distant folklore, but as living explanation. Why is the world nations rage? Why do righteous people suffer? Why do sacred times matter? Why does evil return after judgment? Why should the past govern the present? Jubilees answers these questions with a seriousness that refuses to divide theology from history or worship from the structure of the cosmos. And perhaps that is why the book still lingers in the imagination. Not because it offers sensational secrets, but because it addresses a permanent human unease. We look at history and wonder whether it is only drift, whether time is only succession, whether evil is only accident, whether memory can hold. Jubilees replies that history is measured, time is sacred, evil is real but limited, and memory is kept above the reach of decay. The answer is severe, but it is not empty. It offers a universe in which meaning does not have to be invented because it has already been given. The final image, then, is not of a forbidden manuscript lying in a cave, though caves preserved it. It is not even of angels descending, though angels fill its pages. The final image is of Moses on the mountain, receiving not only commandments but a vision of time itself as covenant ground. Whether one approaches that image devotionally, historically, or with cautious curiosity, it remains one of the most arresting claims in ancient religious literature. History is not merely remembered by God, it is ordered by Him. And down below the mountain, the human world goes on. Families are formed, nations divide, empires advance. Priests argue, calendars can compete, children inherit stories they did not choose. In that world, the Book of Jubilees stands as a witness from another age, saying that beneath every visible struggle there remains a pattern older than kings, older than cities, older than the flood itself. A pattern written before human confusion, carried through judgment, guarded by heaven, and offered again to those willing to live by its measure. That is the strange calm of the book. It knows darkness, rebellion, and corruption. It does not deny them, but it refuses to let them define reality. Before the Watchers fell, time was already holy. Before Mastema accused, the tablets already stood. Before nations forgot, the covenant had already been spoken. For Jubilees, that is the anchor of history. And perhaps that is why, after so many centuries, the book still draws readers back toward the opening pages of Scripture with fresh attention and with a sober, enduring question. If time itself is sacred, how then should a people live?